Here's part 5 of The Most Dangerous Game, picking up after question 19. An apprehensive night crawled slowly by like a wounded snake, and sleep did not visit Rainsford, although the silence of a dead world was on the jungle. Toward morning, when a dingy gray was varnishing the sky, the cry of some startled bird focused Rainsford's attention in that direction. Something was coming through the bush, coming slowly, carefully, coming by the same winding way Rainsford had come. He flattened himself down on the limb, and through a screen of leaves almost as thick as a tapestry he watched. That which was approaching was a man. It was General Zaroff. He made his way along with his eyes fixed in utmost concentration on the ground before him. He paused almost beneath the tree, dropped to his knees, and studied the ground. Rainsford's impulse was to hurl himself down like a panther, but he saw that the general's right hand held something metallic, a small automatic pistol. The hunter shook his head several times as if he were puzzled. Then he straightened up and took from his case one of his black cigarettes. Its pungent, incense-like smoke floated up to Rainsford's nostrils. Pungent is having a strong, usually bad smell. Rainsford held his breath. The general's eyes had left the ground and were traveling inch by inch up the tree. Rainsford froze there, every muscle tensed for a spring, but the sharp eyes of the hunter stopped before they reached the limb where Rainsford lay. A smile spread over his brown face. Very deliberately he blew a smoke ring into the air. Then he turned his back on the tree and walked carelessly away, back along the trail he had come. The swish of the underbrush against his hunting boots grew fainter and fainter. The pent-up air burst hotly from Rainsford's lungs. His first thought made him feel sick and numb. The general could follow a trail through the woods at night. He could follow an extremely difficult trail. He must have uncanny powers. Only by the merest chance had the Cossack failed to see his quarry. Uncanny is unnatural or eerie. Rainsford's second thought was even more terrible. It sent a shudder of cold horror through his whole being. Why had the general smiled? Why had he turned back? Rainsford didn't want to believe what his reason told him was true, but the truth was evident as the sun that by now had pushed through the morning mists. The general was playing with him. The general was saving him for another day's sport. The Cossack was the cat. He was the mouse. Then it was that Rainsford knew the full meaning of terror. I will not lose my nerve. I will not. Question 20. Why does General Zaroff turn back after reaching Rainsford's hiding spot? He can't find Rainsford's hiding spot, so he turns around and walks back up the trail. Or he can't find Rainsford's trail and only stumbles upon his hiding spot by mistake. He's tricked into following a fake trail that Rainsford created to hide his real trail, or he is toying with Rainsford and keep him around for another day of hunting. And I think this is the one when he said he's the cat and I'm the mouse. He's seeing that he's toying with him. He slid down from the tree and struck off again into the woods. His face was set, and he forced the machinery of his mind to function. 300 yards from his hiding place he stopped where a huge dead tree leaned precariously on a smaller living one. Throwing off his sack of food, Rainsford took his knife from the sheath and began working with all his energy. The job was finished at last, and he threw himself down behind a fallen log 100 feet away. He didn't have to wait long. The cat was coming again to play with the mouse. Following the trail with the sureness of a bloodhound came General Zaroff. Nothing escaped those searching black eyes. No crushed blade of grass, no bent twig, no mark, no matter how faint, in the moss. So intent was the Cossack on his stalking that he was upon the thing Rainsford had made before he saw it. His foot touched the protruding bough that was the trigger. Even as he touched it, the general sensed his danger and leaped back with the agility of an ape. But he was not quite quick enough. The dead tree, delicately adjusted to rest on the cut living one, crashed down and struck the general a glancing blow on the shoulder as it fell. But for his alertness, he must have been smashed beneath it. He staggered, but he did not fall, nor did he drop his revolver. He stood there, rubbing his injured shoulder, and Rainsford, with fear again gripping his heart, heard the general's mocking laugh ring through the jungle. "Ha, ha, ha, ha! Rainsford," called the general, "if you're within the sound of my voice, as I suppose you are, let me congratulate you. Not many men know how to make a Malay man-catcher. Lucky for me, I too have hunted in Malacca. You are proving interesting, Mr. Rainsford. I'm going now to have my wound dressed. It's only a slight one, but I shall be back. I shall be back. Question 21. Why did the trap fail? By chance the trap didn't touch Zaroff. Being an experienced hunter, Zaroff mostly avoided the trap. Rainsford didn't have enough supplies and time to make a better trap, or Rainsford did not know that Zaroff also hunted in Malacca, and it was his experience as a hunter that made him realize the danger and step back quickly. When the general, nursing his bruised shoulder, had gone, Rainsford took up his flight again. It was flight now, a desperate, hopeless flight that carried him on for some hours. Dusk came, then darkness, and still he pressed on. The ground grew softer under his moccasins. The vegetation grew ranker, denser. Insects bit him savagely. Then, as he stepped forward, his foot sank into the ooze. He tried to wrench it back, but the muck sucked viciously at his foot as if it were a giant leech. With a violent effort, he tore his foot loose. He knew where he was now, Death Swamp and its quicksand. His hands were tight closed, as if nerve was something tangible that someone in the darkness was trying to tear from his grip. The softness of the earth had given him an idea. He stepped back from the quicksand a dozen feet or so, and like some huge prehistoric beaver he began to dig. Rainsford had dug himself in France when a second's delay meant death. That had been a placid pastime compared to his digging now. The pit grew deeper. When it was above his shoulders he climbed out, and from some hard saplings cut stakes and sharpened them to a fine point. These stakes he planted in the bottom of the pit with the points sticking up. With flying fingers he wove a rough carpet of weeds and branches, and with it he covered the mouth of the pit. Then, wet with sweat and aching with tiredness, he crouched behind the stump of a lightning-charred tree. He knew his pursuer was coming. He heard the padding sound of feet on the soft earth, and the night breeze brought him the perfume of the general's cigarette. It seemed to Rainsford that the general was coming with unusual swiftness. He was not feeling his way along foot by foot. Rainsford, crouching there, could not see the general, nor could he see the pit. He lived a year and a minute. Then he felt an impulse to cry aloud with joy, for he heard the sharp crackle of the breaking branches as the cover of the pit gave way. He heard the sharp scream of pain and the pointed stakes found their mark. He leaped up from his place of concealment. Then he cowered back. 3 feet from the pit a man was standing with an electric torch in his hand. An electric torch is a British word for a flashlight. "You've done well, Rainsford," the voice of the general called. "Your Burmese tiger pit has claimed one of my best dogs. Again you score, I think, Mr. Rainsford. I'll see what you can do against my whole pack. I'm going home for a rest now. Thank you for a most amusing evening." At daybreak, Rainsford, lying near the swamp, was awakened by a sound that made him know that he had new things to learn about fear. It was a distant sound, faint and wavering, but he knew it. He knew it was the baying of a pack of hounds. I think I missed question 22. Here it is. Which of the following best summarizes the outcome of the second trap? It caught but only wounded General Zaroff. It failed, and both Zaroff and his hunting dogs escaped unharmed. It worked on one of Zaroff's dogs, but inspired him to send the rest of the dogs, or it worked in the sense that it scared off Zaroff. And it did get one of his dogs, but it didn't hurt him. Okay, Rainsford knew he could do one of two things. He could stay where he was and wait. That was suicide. He could flee. That was postponing the inevitable. For a moment he stood there, thinking. An idea that held a wild chance came to him, and tightening his belt, he headed away from the swamp. The baying of the hounds drew nearer, then still nearer, ever nearer. On a ridge, Rainsford climbed a tree. Down a watercourse, not a quarter-mile away, he could see the bush moving. Straining his eyes, he saw the lean figure of General Zaroff. Just ahead of him, Rainsford made out another figure whose wide shoulders surged through the tall jungle weeds. It was the giant, Ivan, and he seemed pulled forward by some unseen force. Rainsford knew that Ivan must be holding the pack in a leash. They would be on him any minute now. His mind worked frantically. He thought of a native trick he had learned in Uganda. He slid down the tree. He caught hold of a springy young sapling and to it he fastened his hunting knife with the blade pointing down the trail. With a bit of wild grapevine he tied back the sapling. Then he ran for his life. The hounds raised their voices as they hit the fresh scent. Rainsford knew how an animal at bay feels. At bay means an animal that at bay is one that's forced to turn and face its attackers. He had to stop to get his breath. The baying of the hounds stopped abruptly, and Rainsford's heart stopped too. They must have reached the knife. He shinnied excitedly up a tree and looked back. His pursuers had stopped, but the hope that was in Rainsford's brain when he climbed died, for he saw in the shallow valley that General Zaroff was still on his feet. But Ivan was not. The knife, driven by the recoil of the springing tree, had not wholly failed. So what was the outcome of the third trap? It killed more of Zaroff's dogs. It alerted the dogs to his trail. It drove the knife into Ivan, killing him, or it failed to do anything useful. And it did kill Ivan. Okay, Rainsford had hardly tumbled to the ground when the pack took up the cry again. "Nerve, nerve, nerve," he panted as he dashed along. A blue gap showed between the trees dead ahead. Ever nearer drew the hounds. Rainsford forced himself on toward that gap. He reached it. It was the shore of the sea. Across a cove he could see the gloomy gray stone of the chateau. 20 feet below him the sea rumbled and hissed. Rainsford hesitated. He heard the sounds. Then he leaped far out into the sea. When the general and his pack reached the place by the sea, the Cossack stopped. For some minutes he stood regarding the blue-green expanse of water. He shrugged his shoulders. Then he sat down, took a drink of brandy from a silver flask, lit a cigarette, and hummed a bit from Madame Butterfly, which is an opera. General Zaroff had an exceedingly good dinner in his great panelled dining hall that evening. With it he had a bottle of Pol Roger and half a bottle of Chambertin. 2 slight annoyances kept him from perfect enjoyment. One was the thought that it would be difficult to replace Ivan. The other was that his quarry had escaped him. Of course the American hadn't played the game, so thought the general as he tasted his after-dinner liqueur. In his library he read to soothe himself from the works of Marcus Aurelius, and that is a Roman emperor and philosopher. At 10 he went up to his bedroom. He was deliciously tired. He said to himself as he locked himself in, there was a little moonlight, so before turning on his light he went to the window and looked down at the courtyard. He could see the great hounds, and he called, "Better luck another time," to them. Then he switched on the light. A man who had been hiding in the curtains of the bed was standing there. "Rainsford!" screamed the general. "How in God's name did you get here?" "Swam," said Rainsford. "I found it quicker than walking through the jungle." The general sucked in his breath and smiled. "I congratulate you," he said. "You have won the game." Rainsford did not smile. "I am still a beast at bay," he said in a low, hoarse voice. "Get ready, General Zaroff." The general made one of his deepest bows. "I see," he said. "Splendid. One of us is to furnish a repast for the hounds, which is a meal. The other will sleep in this very excellent bed. On guard, Rainsford." He had never slept in a better bed, Rainsford decided. Last question. What does the final line of the story reveal? That Rainsford survived the fall into the sea? That Rainsford was rescued after jumping? That Rainsford would continue the general's hunt? Or that Rainsford won the game and killed the general? And it is D. Rainsford won the game and killed the general. Okay.